Did you know that the largest species of cactus can reach up to 66 feet tall and can weigh up to 4,800 pounds?
Nope, I didn't know that, but hello and welcome back to Axoschools. Yesterday we told you about all of the things that the American colonies didn't like leading up to the American Revolution and why they wanted to break up with Britain and King George III. But Karosh left us on a cliffhanger with Paul Revere taking a ride on April 18th, 1775.
Paul Revere was a patriot in the American Revolution. He is most famous for his ride and warning to the colonists that the British were coming.
In April of 1775, the British Army was stationed in Boston, and rumor had it that they were about to make a move. This move was going to be against the Sons of Liberty and other American patriots who were fighting for liberty of the colonies.
The Sons of Liberty were watching the British closely so that they could warn the colonists if the British started to attack.
Two main riders were set out to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington, Kentucky. The two riders took different paths that hopefully one of them would make it there safely to warn Adams and Hancock. Paul Revere was one of those riders, and he had the shorter path, which is the one I would have opted to take. He went across the Charles River to Charleston and then to Lexington.
Yep, William Dawes was the other rider, and he took the longer, different route. There were also other riders that Revere and Dawes would tell along the way. These other riders would pass along the warning to other locations.
Paul Revere had set up another warning system in case none of the riders actually made it. He told Robert Newman to set lanterns in the steeple of the Old North Church to alert the colonists of Charleston. He would put one lantern if the British were coming by land, and two if they were coming by sea.
Yes. The battles of Lexington and Concord signaled the start of the American Revolutionary War on April 19th, 1775. The British, I feel like I'm telling a scary story.
You
The
are.
British Army set from Boston to capture rebel leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington. They were also trying to destroy the American colonists' store of weapons and ammunition in Concord.
Thanks to Paul Revere and William Dawes, Sam Adams and John Hancock were able to escape, and the local militia was able to hide much of their ammunition and weapons.
The Battle of Lexington was a very small fight. In fact, you could hardly call it a battle. It is important, though, because it's where the Revolutionary War started.
When the British arrived in Lexington, there were about 80 American militiamen, but an entire British force. Neither side expected to actually fight, but in the midst of the confusion, a gunshot went off, forcing the British to attack.
This was called The Shot Heard Around the World by Ralph Waldo Emerson in his poem Concord. No one knows. Okay, what's that word?
Hymn.
Concord Hymn. No one knows who fired the first shot, or if it was the American colonists or the British soldiers.
After the Americans fled from Lexington, the British marched to the city of Concord and tried to find the hidden stash of weapons and ammunition. The American colonists were smart, though, and retreated to the outskirts of Concord to observe the British from the other side of the North Bridge. More and more militiamen started showing up, and their forces got stronger.
The Americans decided to cross the North Bridge and go back into Concord, where they defeated the British troops. This gave them the renewed spirit of confidence.
Once the British decided to retreat, they began their long march back to the city of Boston.
On June 17, 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill took place. The British were trying to keep control of the city of Boston because it's a valuable seaport. The British decided their best bet was to take the two hills, Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, in order to gain an advantage over the colonies. The American forces heard about this and wanted to defend those hills.
So where did these battles take place? You'd think this would be an easy question to answer, but it's actually quite tricky and a great trivia question. The two hills were Breed's Hills and Bunker Hill. But the Battle of Bunker Hill actually took place mostly on Breed's Hill because that makes a lot of sense, right? It's only called the Battle of Bunker Hill because the army thought that they were actually on Bunker Hill for that battle. But the truth is they were on Breed's Hill. They got the names all messed up.
Oh, man. The Battle of Bunker Hill was a major battle where William Prescott, the leader of the colonists during this battle, told his troops, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes."
That means they had to be really close. Ultimately, the British won the battle and gained control of the hills, but they paid a heavy price to do so. They lost hundreds of soldiers, including several of their officers. This gave the Americans the courage and confidence that they could stand up to the British in battle, and also led to many more colonists joining the army.
This made the revolution continue to grow in strength for the colonists. Colonies.
Yes. The 13 colonies in America had been at war with Britain for about a year when the Second Continental Congress decided it was time for the colonies to officially declare their independence.
This meant that they were breaking away from British rule. They would no longer be a part of the British Empire, and they would fight for their freedom.
On June 11th, 1776, the Continental Congress appointed 5 leaders called the Committee of 5. They were told to write a document explaining why they were declaring their independence.
The 5 members were Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and Thomas Jefferson. The members decided that Thomas Jefferson would write the first draft.
Like any good writer, Thomas Jefferson took a few weeks to draft up a document. He didn't have Google Docs to share it with his buddies for editing, or Zoom so he could talk with them online. So they met again to make some changes. They presented it to the Continental Congress on June 28, 1776.
Not everyone in Congress agreed at first on declaring independence from the British. Some wanted to wait until they had secured stronger alliances with other foreign countries.
During the first round of voting, South Carolina and Pennsylvania actually voted no, and New York and Delaware chose not to vote at all. Congress wanted the vote to be unanimous, which meant that they wanted everyone to say yes and to be in agreement. So they continued to discuss the issues together.
On July 2nd, South Carolina and Pennsylvania reversed their votes to a yes, and Delaware decided to give a yes vote as well. No vote from New York ever came in, but with 12 yes votes and 1 abstention, which was New York not voting at all, there was an agreement to declare independence.
On July 14, 1776, Congress officially adopted the final version of the Declaration of Independence, which is still celebrated on this day in the United States. We call it Independence Day. Fitting, right?
Absolutely fitting. After the signing, tons of copies were made and sent all over the colonies. The Declaration was read aloud in public and published in newspapers.
A copy of it also was sent to the British government. I bet they were thrilled to get this letter.
Totally thrilled, I assume.
Totally thrilled.
The Declaration of Independence did more than just say the colonies wanted their freedom, though. It explained why they wanted their freedom. Just like you did in your breakup text message letter with King George III, it listed all the bad things the king had done to the colonies, and that the colonies had rights to be treated a certain way, which they felt like they should fight for.
Perhaps one of the most famous statements in the history of the United States resides in the Declaration of Independence. It states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
About 6 months later, it was Christmas. And the weather was terrible because it was in the middle of winter. It was windy, cold, and snowing. There was this icy river between the British Army in Trenton, New Jersey, and the Continental Army on the other side.
George Washington and the Continental Army crossed the Delaware River into New Jersey in a surprise attack on the British. The British probably thought they wouldn't be attacked because of the terrible weather conditions, and they had to go across an icy river. But the British Army was not ready at all and surrendered fairly easily. They had a victory at the Battle of Trenton, and that helped them turn the war back in America's favor.
The battle at Trenton was an important win because the American forces were going through a very tough time right before the crossing of the river. Many militiamen were injured or ready to leave the army. The army desperately needed a victory and served as a huge boost in morale for the American soldiers.
All the colonists needed something that they could hold with honor during the American Revolutionary War. The Congress decided that the country needed a flag to represent the United Colonies. On June 14th, 1777, the Second Continental Congress passed a flag resolution. This day is celebrated as Flag Day in the United States.
The resolution said that the United States flag would have 13 red and white alternating stripes, and that there would be a blue area with 13 white stars. They didn't give an exact description of the flag, and there were actually several different versions of it.
Let's pause for a minute and talk about our flag. The United States flag is a symbol of our freedom. Many men and women have died over the years to preserve our freedom, and the flag represents them as well. There are rules of the flag and an etiquette that goes along with the flag, which include never letting the flag touch the ground, how and where it should be displayed, and that if you choose to display it at night, it needs to be illuminated. Unpause.
The next battles we need to cover are the battles of Saratoga. The battles of Saratoga occurred in September and October of 1777. It included two crucial battles fought 18 days apart.
The First Battle of Saratoga, or also known as the Battle of Freemans Farm, happened when opposing armies came face to face on September 19th on the abandoned farm of loyalist John Freeman near Saratoga, New York.
Pause again. Just to note, a loyalist was any American colonist that stayed loyal to King George III and Britain during the American Revolution. Unpause.
The fierce fighting at Freemans Farm lasted for several hours. The momentum of who would win the battle kept changing sides several times, but neither side actually gained a significant advantage. That is, until General Burgoyne made a tricky power move, along with his tricky name, utilizing other resources.
He ordered his column of German troops to support the faltering British line and forced the Americans to pull back. Still, the British suffered twice the number of casualties than the American colonists and couldn't continue their drive into Albany, New York.
Yep. General Burgoyne, a tough one, decided to stay. That was right? And wait for reinforcements from New York City. But while he was twiddling his thumbs, the American colonist troops increased to over 13,000 and continued to grow.
By the time October 7th hit, 18 days from the beginning of the battle at Freeman's Farm, supplies were dwindling, and General Burgoyne realized waiting for backup was useless.
He sent out some troops to attack the colonists' left flank in the wooded area of Bemis Heights, which was south of Saratoga.
He tried to be tricky, but the American colonists figured out what was going on, and forced the British to withdraw.
I tell you what, though, he tricks me every time I have to say his name. General Burgoyne tried to get his army to safety, but everything seemed to be against him at this point. The heavy rain and cold temperatures slowed their retreat, and within 2 days, the American colonists surrounded what remained of his army.
Well, that stinks. This man couldn't catch a break. On October 17th, he ended up surrendering because, well, frankly, he was out of supplies and out of options.
The battle became known as the Battle of Bemis Heights or the Second Battle of Saratoga. These series of battles culminated into what is known as the Battles of Saratoga.
This decisive victory by the colonies was another turning point of the Revolutionary War. The morale of the colonists was boosted, and the colonists now felt like they could actually win the war.
Another important thing that happened was the French decided to support the Americans with military aid. Game changer.
Whew, that did change the game. During the winter of 1777 to 1778, the American Continental Army made camp at Valley Forge. It was here that the American forces became a true fighting unit.
True. Valley Forge is often called the birthplace of the American Army.
George Washington chose to make the winter camp at Valley Forge for several reasons. Reason number one was because it was close to Philadelphia, where the British were camping for winter.
This made it easy for the Continental Army to keep an eye
Just one.
on the British, just a single eye, like this. Now I'm watching you. Now I'm not. On the British and protect the people of Pennsylvania.
If the British decided to attack, Valley Forge was far enough away so that he could have plenty of warning before that happened.
And that's reason number two.
Dos más.
It was a good place to defend if the army was attacked. There were high areas and rivers that people would have to cross, and these served as good barriers.
Let's keep in mind, this is not the type of camping trip we would want to go on during the middle of winter. The conditions that the soldiers had to endure at Valley Forge were horrible, terrible, awful.
You're right. It was cold, wet, and snowy, and they were oftentimes hungry because food was scarce. Many of the soldiers were not even equipped with warm clothing or shoes. A lot of them had worn out their shoes on the long march.
This allowed for diseases and sickness to spread throughout the camp. Diseases such as typhoid fever, pneumonia, and smallpox took the lives of 2,500 soldiers.
On a positive note, shoulders or soldiers? It took the lives of 5,000 shoulders, but only 2,500 soldiers.
Yes.
On a positive note, George Washington did get to train his troops there, so that's good.
And on another positive note, on February 16th, 1778, France recognized the United States as an independent country with the Treaty of Alliance.
Fast forward. March 2nd, 1781. The Articles of Confederation were written and accepted as the original Constitution of the United States, but that's a whole different subject to talk about another time.
That's right. The Articles of Confederation defined the official government of the U.S. It was replaced by the United States Constitution in 1789.
The Battle of Yorktown happened in 1781. It was the last great battle of the American Revolution. The British Army surrendered, and the British government began to consider a peace treaty. It was about time.
On October 19th, 1781, General Cornwallis of the British Army signed a surrender. The document was called the Articles of Capitulation.
Capitulation is the action of surrendering or ceasing to resist an opponent anymore.
Around 8,000 British troops surrendered in Yorktown.
Now, this wasn't every last one of them in the British Army, but it was a big enough force to cause the British to start thinking that they were going to lose.
Losing this battle made them start to
want
think.
them to lose.
What?
Actually, not because we want them to lose.
Oh, I was just saying they were gonna lose. You're going down. All right, losing this battle made them start to think about peace and that it was not worth the cost anymore of the war to keep the colonies. This opened the door for the Treaty of Paris.
The Treaty of Paris was the official peace treaty between the United States and Britain that ended the American Revolutionary War. It was signed on September 3rd, 1783.
The Congress of the Confederation ratified the treaty on January 14th, 1784, and King George III ratified it on April 9th, 1784. Hey, that's my birthday! But I wasn't born in the year of 1784, or was I?
I also don't know.
When something is ratified, it is signed or formal consent is given, which makes it officially valid. So the treaty was technically officially valid on April 9th, 1784.
It's called the Treaty of Paris because it was actually negotiated in the city of Paris, France.
3 important Americans that were in France at the time negotiated the treaty for the United States. They were John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay.
They did a great job in negotiating the treaty. 2 important things came out of it.
Yep. Number 1, and most important to the Americans, was the British recognizing the 13 colonies to be free and independent states.
Yeah, Britain, you have no claim over us anymore. Not our land or how we choose to govern ourselves.
Number 2
Mass.
was that the boundaries of the United States allowed for westward expansion.
This one would prove to be really important for the United States as it continued to grow west all the way to the Pacific Ocean and into the country that we are today.
Other things in the treaty were agreements on fishing rights, debts, prisoners of war, access to the Mississippi River, and the property of loyalists. Both sides wanted to protect their citizens' rights and possessions.
That's right. And of course, King George III wasn't there himself to sign the treaty or meet about it. So David Hartley, a member of the British Parliament, represented the British and King George III there.
This took forever, by the way. After the British Army surrendered at Battle of Yorktown in 1781, it took about a year and a half to officially get the agreement.
Each point of the treaty is called an article. Today, the only article that is still in force is Article 1.
Yep. Article Uno Mas was the most important article and recognizes the United States as an independent country.
Check out the links below and keep learning about the American Revolution. There's a ton of stuff that goes into it and a lot of other battles that we didn't even cover. Tomorrow, Karosh will present his timeline creation for the American Revolution, the events leading up to it, as well as some of the key battles that we went through, and he will highlight those key events for you.
I have something to add.
See you tomorrow after Karosh adds something.
Yes.
I have a new favorite word. Capitulation. Bye.
Bye.